This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode number 175. Hello, Timothy. I am in Tel Aviv, Israel, having a recitation tomorrow night for the opening of The War Is Never Over at the Cinematheque Cinema Documentaries about music.
Was that a direct flight to Tel Aviv, or did you have a connection?
10 hours of stenching hell. I sat next to a
Really?
drooling grandpa who was stabbing his food. I had to keep catching his tray from going over the side into the aisle, who was snoring and farting repeatedly. It was one of the worst flights of my life, considering I was in not economy, but uh, select, right under business class. It stenched. The food was dreadful. Unfortunately, on after a 10-hour long flight, you can imagine 2 hours at JFK to get here. Fortunately, I had a people mover take me right to the front of the customs line and got out of the building in no time and had dinner and drinks at a fabulous place that had more bottles of wine and booze than I've ever seen in my life in a restaurant, and have just returned to my room after being on the roof, which has nobody else up there but me and my new friend Toby, who has a documentary on King Crimson at the same festival.
Whoa, okay.
We'll have him on the show soon. And the roof terrace, which has nobody. And the thing is, his parents live on the same street as Robert Fripp, which is why he was hired to do the documentary. But we'll go into him very soon because this documentary is playing in New York around Thanksgiving. So we're going to have him on the show.
Yeah, which means he probably knows
Anyway.
Toya also, because
Oh, well, he's not a fan, but who is? Anyway, I'm a bit ravaged since I just landed at around 6 o'clock. Stayed at my hotel for about an hour, went out to drink and eat with, 8 of the festival people, and just happy I'm off that 10-hour flight.
What airline? What airline?
Delta. I mean, the thing is, it should have been fine except for the drooling, dribbling, stenching grandpa next to me.
Ugh, I'm sorry
I did
about
finish
that.
watching a film that both Kevin Shea and I started on our last flight, which was called Fall, about two dimwit chicks who end up on top of a long pole in the middle of the sky in the middle of nowhere, which is ridiculous. But anyway, I did finish that. Slept most of the way because I was previous to that. Well, I had other things to do.
Yes, you're very busy. I just got back, but I only saw you briefly. You had a million things to do, and I was just kind of winding down.
A dozen, but not a million.
Well, you're just chipping away at the list that we all give ourselves, and seems like that was a success. I'm sorry your flight was.
Happy to see you the other night.
Likewise, always a pleasure.
Sorry I had to kick you out, but that is the way it is sometimes.
Oh no, I you didn't have to kick me out. It was winding down. We said what we had to say, and
well, but then of course you rang the doorbell because you well helping me extract some stuff from my house. When nobody likes when the police turn their lights on you.
Yeah, I had a couple of drinks, and then I was bringing some of your trash down to the garbage can, and the cop was going slow-mo with a spotlight. They were looking for someone, but it was on me for a second. I was like, I don't know. Maybe
they would have been looking for me, but you know what? They know better.
I just let them. I waited 10 minutes for them to get out of the area.
How was the Sunday dinner at Simon Satan's?
I loved it. That's Simon's new. That's his new thing, as Sunday dinners, and it was a Julia Child recipe, a chicken and potato French style. What was it called again?
We had coq au vin. Now I have some insight into this. I bought the Julia Child book and I cooked it. This is what I realized. It is a huge step from doing Italian cooking to French cooking. French cooking is very precise. You really have to read the directions very, very carefully. There were some issues where I didn't, so in the recipe, it asks for 20 onions to be sauteed whole. I was how do you even do that? How do you saute a giant onion? And then I missed the part that they were supposed to be 1 inch in diameter. So I have now 20 onions sitting in my house.
Well, Simon, one day, eventually, probably not too far in the distant future, you'll just be like a improvisational chef like I am.
Yeah, that's right. Just kind of chopping things in the air. It'll be great.
Oh, yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, yes, it's a lot of the, I mean, not all Italian dishes are simple, but I think, the majority are all about the simplicity, where the French is about the complexity, and that's just,
what's amazing about Simon Slater now taking up the knives and fire is that he goes for really elaborate, long time cooking, Sunday subs. I myself, it has to be ready in 30 minutes or less. I'm like a chop, dice, dash, and get that shit ready. I really
Venture
respect
cooking.
the time he takes.
it's they're all different satisfactions, and so I mean, why
Well,
not
Tim,
explore them?
yourself is that you are the grill master.
Well, one, not the grill master on the planet, but I do love doing it. And
I'm the grilling master. I love to grill people. You like to just grill books.
Oh boy. Well, let's see. Where can I run? Where's the connection here? Well,
I have no
Taylor.
idea because I got no other stories but the ones you're about to tell. So go
Well,
ahead.
Taylor Parker got grilled and drilled. Oh, nice. 29 from Texas. She's just been sentenced to death. You're showing me a bottle of booze, but okay.
I'm going to sentence myself to liquid death in a minute.
There you go. Taylor Parker, 29, sentenced to death for killing Reagan Hancock of 21, who was pregnant because she was trying to cut out her unborn baby so she could have it. And it's more than just like maybe she wasn't fertile. That wasn't that. It was about her and her boyfriend breaking up, and she was lying and saying, "Oh, I'm pregnant," and she went so far that she was wearing these kind of prosthetic guts or uterus bulging bellies, whatever you want to. She was going that far. She doctored up a fake ultrasound.
I mean, this happens actually more often than not. I mean, this has kind of been a rage for a while, and I don't get it.
Yeah, she doctored up a fake ultrasound. She even had, with all her family, a gender reveal party, even though she wasn't pregnant the whole time. And then she's like, "What do I do?" So she thought the best solution was to find a pregnant woman and murder and cut out the baby, and she thought that was going to work out. Well, now she's going to be sentenced to death. She killed someone else. I think the baby didn't live. The whole thing is just insane. But
the other side of that spectrum is, I don't know what channel wants to do this. What they want to do another Casey Anthony doc, and the thing is, people are going, if she's not going to tell the frickin' truth, if there's nothing revealed, leave her out, because she got away with disappearing her own child, or somebody did.
Right.
She's a Looney Tune. Parents almost indicted. I mean, this baby drama has got to stop.
Yeah, really. Well, I'll keep the thread with Texas drama. Over the Veterans Day weekend, which is passed, Dallas had their annual, I think it's called Wings Over Dallas Air Show.
Oh yeah.
Of all these, they're kind of, I guess they're honoring the Air Force, but it's also kind of like a military propaganda thing. Like, look what we got. Well, they had a bunch of, these are all experts too. They had 2 World War II retired planes, one the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, the other the Bell P-63 King Cobra. Well, they're doing some kind of fancy move, and they just head-on collision, and that was that. And 6 people died. It was kind of a disaster. My dad used to take my brother and I to the Chicago Air Show. They would have every summer, and they don't really do what they used to do. I mean, they those things used to like weave between like the skyscrapers and stuff. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I think they don't really do that anymore. But I guess what Ramstein Air Base in Germany, that was the famous head-on collision, and that's when they had the huge crowds underneath it. So I think 2 F-16s collided midair and then just like dropped onto a giant crowd.
A good pilot is hard to find. Every time you enter a fucking plane, you're taking your life into your own hands. But I have to say, flight was pretty smooth, other than the dribbling grandpa putting fucking food down his own top. It was disgusting anyway.
Oh God. So I mean, when you said that the plane smelled bad, I mean, usually those planes.
I thought that somebody was vaping a really rancid tobacco, and it just it stenched, and it was totally packed. It was one of these giant flights, full of babies and others. I mean, I have to say, in situations like that, unlike in my own bed, I just basically slept for about 7 or 8 of the 10 hours.
And that's rare for you. I'm impressed. I mean, you had to like work some magic in your brain to pull that one off.
Yeah, and also because the flight takes off around midnight, but not soon after that, it's daylight everywhere because it's 7 hours ahead here. So I definitely work some. I mean, yeah, I work some magic.
But
I
those
can speak on planes.
but those
I
newer
wish I had a
planes
nose
that
plug.
those newer planes for just to deal with that. I mean, they have those automated tinted window things where it makes it
No,
black.
these are
Even
shades, but
oh, so it's
I,
old school. Okay.
I have to say there was one really hot stewardess who was such a good attitude. An older hot gal, a
Okay.
cougar, if I must,
Okay.
who was just so lively, light, polite, sassy. It was like just to see her face made a big difference. And of course, I had to tell her, I'm like, you know what? You saved this flight in my mind's eye from going down in the fucking ocean.
It is a certain character type when
Well, a
they went
stewardess that could take a 10-hour flight.
well, flight attendants, and then of course there's all this training for tolerance, all that stuff. I just wonder if in reality there's just tons of resentment and rage just building
Well,
up.
she did look like she could be. She could have been a bit of a hate fucker, but I mean, another girl who had to tend to the drooling, dribbling grandpa. And by the way, dribbling grandpa. So I get off the plane and he's got VIP wheelie, and I'm like,
Ooh.
hey, how does grandpa? I mean, I didn't know who he was or what he was. He's getting a VIP treatment, but of course, I just latch onto that people mover, and I have to say, I was out of that airport within 3 minutes of getting off the flight. Because you know me, I'm a
And
wang dang doodle. I just go
I
right to the head of the line.
right. Well, I've never been to Israel, but what's the customs like? Is that kind of is like
Well, like I said, I was out of there in 3 minutes because I just told the guy who was doing the people mover, I'm like, listen, my friend, front of the line for me. He's like, no problem, let me take you there. And he just walked me to the front of the
interesting?
line and out. That was miraculous. So I was literally out of the airport within 3 minutes.
What's the
Which
climate
would
like
have been
there?
about an hour and 20 minutes if I hadn't, my usual wiring.
Totally, totally. What's the weather like in Tel Aviv right now?
Oh, 75 degrees.
Okay. All right.
Now it's about 55 at night. I'm going back up to the roof after I get off with you because I'm going to go. I might even go for a little skinny dip up in that pool.
Ooh,
Nobody's up there.
now you're talking.
I am.
Well,
I mean, I might need a bath. I might as well, since I don't have a bathtub in my room, I might as well go take a bath in the swimming pool.
well, speaking of diving, I'm glad you brought up swimming. These kind of treasure seekers, underwater archaeologist types in Florida, they were looking for these old World War II ship or plane. I don't know. Something went down. They had a general idea. They did a lot of research where they could find it. Well, they didn't find that. They found chunks of NASA's Challenger, the space shuttle that blew up. I remember seeing that live in '86 with the Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher who was on board. And yeah, they're like, "What the what's this?" Like, oh, this is part of a space shuttle. It was really weird. I remember I was a kid, and that they kind of wheeled in a TV so we could all see that. The teachers were particularly interested because one of my teachers was kind of a finalist to be selected and didn't get it. Fortunately for her, but pre-internet, and it's all kids. Within 24 hours, the jokes about that, like the bad, distasteful jokes, I don't know how they circulated it. It's how they circulated, but every kid knew some kind of Challenger explosion joke the next day. And I don't even know how we all knew them. It was like,
well, that brings us up to our next guest, I have to say. That speaking about people blowing things up,
yes,
let's just say that Stuart Swezey, who has documented desert concerts that he, created and invited people to, and especially the footage of Mark Pauline in the Desolation Center video is just absolutely golden. Speaking about blowing shit up. Well, there we go, and there's no joke about it. We have somebody that started his own book company, released not only some of our friends, Jack Sargent, John Tottenham, had a bookstore, did these desert recordings with people like the Meat Puppets, the Minutemen, Sonic Youth, Einstürzende Neubauten, and Survival Research Laboratories. And if you don't know who that is, kids, fucking look it up. Oh, that's who we have on this episode, because with that, I'm going up to the roof and taking my clothes off and jumping into the goddamn swimming pool because it's 70 degrees here right now. So this is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Stuart Swezey.
You're going to roofie yourself.
I'm going to roofie myself. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest today is Stuart Swezey, who's had a very diverse career involving a lot of our friends and people that we've had on the Lydia and Spin. Stuart is a producer, filmmaker, book publisher, radical of the highest order. And if not for him, probably there would not have eventually developed into Burning Man, Coachella, or Lollapalooza. So let's start at the beginning. Hi, Stuart.
Hey.
So, Stuart, good to see you. You came out of the LA scene, you know, the late 70s, early 80s. Punk was happening, alternative music, alternative culture. And just out of nowhere, you decided to have some desert concerts?
Not exactly. I mean, it was more like a combination of trying to do shows with a lot of sort of police clampdowns and heavy shit that was going on at the time with our old police chief Daryl Gates, who, you know, really didn't like punk rock and didn't like.
He was an asshole. He was an asshole in general. New York did not face that then at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was part of it. And then the other part of it, I think, was I was coming out of the punk rock scene, which was great in, you know, downtown, you know, Chinatown, places where the Germs would play,
Al's
Chinese
Club.
restaurant. Yeah. Or, you know, even the Whiskey A Go-Go was great for seeing bands. But I felt like as the music was evolving, maybe we needed to adapt to that in a certain way. So it was like two different things. It was outside pressure and then also trying to kind of. Also, I think maybe LA at the time still had a little bit of a inferiority complex compared to New York and even San Francisco and stuff. So I was also looking at like, what have we got here that other places don't? And if we went out to the desert, that's something that you couldn't do.
Space.
Yeah.
Well, not just space. I checked out your documentary, and there's also with youth and just punk rock in general, there's a contrarian position. So I saw the original rules. Absolutely no dancing. We're not a new wave disco. and so you have this pushback from the police. And then also it's like, well, where do we make our mark? And so there's going to be a contrarian position, I think, just inevitably. I could be wrong, but I feel like that was part of it as well, right?
So
Yes.
the documentary, is a documentary called Desolation Center? Because that was the name under which you were promoting and booking these shows, correct?
Right. So, you know, after running through a bunch of different ideas, what should we call it? We ended up with Desolation Center because that was our little umbrella of people that did these sort of underground shows. And so it evolved from just warehouse party type stuff to this idea of taking people out to the desert on school buses, which is when things started to get really weird and unusual. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that so many people now have like migrated to Joshua Tree, not to mention, you know, the festivals that I mentioned earlier, but so many people are now out in the desert, recognizing that space is one of the most valuable commodities and peace of mind and lack of persecution from the forces that be. So the first time you decide to do this, all right, great idea, buddy. We're going to get some school buses, tell people we're going out there. Give us a little procedural antidotes and who was in that first concert? How'd you even convince them to play out in the desert? God knows what awaits.
I mean, part of it was that I had been driving through the desert in Mexico and listening to, and I mean, I you know, just found out today that Keith Levine died from PIL. And which
yes,
is,
I heard about that. Yes,
really
most underrated, underused, and underambitious, fantastic musician. I've tried for years to get him to do something. That's horrible. Yeah. He was amazing. His contribution to PIL.
So PIL was one of the inspirations, but another band that was local was Savage Republic, who were doing this sort of Ennio Morricone meets Arabic meets Einstürzende Neubauten, kind of noisy, cool shit that
with really
sounded
great,
really good.
With really great covers for their artwork as well. Their artwork is a very important part of what they were doing.
Completely original, yeah, where it just jumped off the record rack. And so I was a fan of them. I'd already done shows with the Minutemen. I knew those guys. So the first show was kind of two headliners, but that not a lot of people really cared about at the time. So it was Savage Republic and the Minutemen. And so in the case of the Minutemen, they would play anywhere, anytime. They were always down. In the case of Savage Republic, you know, I didn't really know Bruce, but who was one of the members but he knew a location out in the desert that was a dry lake bed. So he was like, let's just go out there. You know, my dad used to fly gliders out in the desert, and so once I saw the place, I was like, okay, this is not just a good idea. Like, we have to do this. And then the school bus thing was, at the time, you know, having promoted just small gigs and stuff, I was trying to figure out, well, there's no door, you know, how do we get money for this? And also, like, it solved another whole problem of people just getting,
lost, which happened.
Yeah, messed up.
We'll talk about that. So we'll talk about the great loss of Red Cross in a minute, but that was amazing.
So that was the first show, and it was three school buses.
Also, Stuart, not to interrupt you, but I mean, that goes back to like Ken Kesey, you know, his bus thing. The Mansons had a bus. We'll get into them later. So it kind of has a history hoarding people onto a bus and taking to an obscure location.
Absolutely. And the, you know, those were things that we were aware of, you know, the Merry Pranksters and all that. And I knew about the acid tests. And I think that was more kind of like small scale things that I could understand, as opposed to Woodstock or, you know, like Sticks at the Forum or whatever that we kind of had growing up. I felt like it should be, you know, if it's going to be punk, it should be small scale, even if it wasn't, you know, your classic idea of, you know, what CBGB's was or whatever. So that
was still small scale. Let's be honest.
No, that's what I'm saying. But like, I wanted to change the scope, but I didn't. I was still thinking about what could, you know, kids in their early 20s do with minimal, you know, money to pull anything off. So, you know, the bus thing kind of, we figured out that would be enough. It would solve a couple different things. It would get people out of town that weren't used to going out to the desert. They wouldn't have to worry about, you know, whatever they were going to consume on the way out there. And then also it was a way to sell tickets and sort of make it work so the bands could get paid, the sound guy could get paid.
But also Stuart, because I, you know, living in Brooklyn, traditionally in southern Brooklyn where no one lives, quote unquote, if you throw a party and people actually do commit, they're staying there for a while. It's not like a club where you're just like, I'm into this band, I'm going to leave. Everyone's full in once they make that commitment. So
I love the idea of hostaging people out there as well. And let me just add this, that there is no death in the desert that smelt as bad as CBGB's toilets. Nothing.
I can only imagine. But you know what? There's a couple different things that was kind of in our minds. I mean, Bruce had Chris Burden, the artist who did some pretty crazy performance stuff.
Shot himself in the leg.
Yeah. You know, crucified himself on a VW bug. And so he was really into messing with the mind of the audience. And so that was part of it, is we didn't tell people where they were going. That was just a little, you know, extra bonus to the whole thing, is it was kind of a hostage situation. They had to trust us that we knew what we were doing.
And you didn't really have any provisions out there, toilets, food, water. No, good luck, kids.
We actually did have a porta potty dropped off.
Oh.
So that was kind of like, yeah.
Nice.
One.
So that's where the buses at least could have some orientation of like, where is this gig going to happen? But
find the porta potty.
But what we didn't really think about was wind, which, you know, we should have. But there was, the first gig was, you know, a flat, dry lake bed with a lot of wind. And so that's when we decided that the buses would be kind of like the windbreak. So we made a triangle there. And,
what year was that first concert?
That was 1983.
Right. And so that was, you know, and anybody that attended it, I mean, they were set in a different direction of possible experiential performances, which is great. So how long did it take you to decide, okay, we got to do this again somewhere else in the desert?
I don't think I really had a plan. I thought it went well and everything, but I was sort of thinking about more of my life, like what should I do next? And so doing another desert show wasn't the obvious thing to me. So I ended up, leaving LA for a while, ending up on the way I met Genesis Bjorge and different people that I was able to look up, but ended up in Berlin, met a group of people that some of whom were Einstürzende Neubauten, some other people that, had already played in LA, like Volker from MDK and people like that. And that whole environment kind of made me want to do another desert show, because like I basically, some of the people that were in Einstürzende Neubauten then, some of them still are, but I was like, well, we should, if you're ever in LA, which seemed really hypothetical at the time, we should do a desert show. And so that really is what led to the second one, because it was about 6 months after I got back home and I didn't have that much going on in my life. They called me up. They're like, we're going to be in LA. We're in New York. You got 2 weeks. Can you do a desert show? And then it was also like, by that time, I was pretty aware of the research books and, industrial culture handbooks. So I knew who Mark Pauline was, Survival Research Laboratories. I knew about Boyd because he used to live here in LA, Boyd Rice. But all these different people kind of came together for that show, which was really cool for me.
Well, and Alexander Hacka, who we've had on the show, is a good friend of ours, who you've also published a book, We Are Gypsies, of Danielle and Hacka. I mean, well, we're going to get into the books in a minute, because you've published a few of our favorite people, like John Tottenham and Jack Sargent. But Neubauten decides to go out to the desert. But let's talk a little bit about Mark Pauline and survival research, because they were pretty much West Coast based. And I think they maybe made it to New York once, twice to do about Mark Pauline and survival research. Before there were professional drone bot dog things, they made huge machines set to kill either each other. The noisiest shows and most gasoline soaked ever. It was industrial, mechanical, magic, violence, terror. And you happen to capture some of that in the desert. Mark Pauline, who blew most of his one hand off.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know which part of that you want me to pick up on, but it was basically, I think Alexander Hacka who said, like, we could get Mark Pauline to come to our show. And then I was like, okay, great. And so I ended up talking to Mark, and he goes, well, can you give us gas money? And I was like, great.
Because they were in San Francisco. They were outside of San Francisco.
And the gas money, was that for transportation or
the machines?
Well, yeah, a little both. But anyway, what ended up happening was they didn't bring all the robots and mechanical mayhem that I had in my mind, was thinking that they would do, because really they couldn't transport all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. These machines were giant. I mean, there's no exactly.
And there was, like, I guess, like a mechanical, remote controlled tank that they were gonna bring. But anyway, long story short, they totally improvised and basically just brought a bunch of explosive powder, black powder, dynamite, and found everything out in the desert, and put together like old refrigerators and just cast off metal, and made these what they called totem poles, and blew them up, which was brilliant,
of course.
So that was the opening act for Einstürzende Neubauten,
which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And these shows, you were brilliantly intuitive to film these shows, which then ended up being the documentary Desolation, right?
Did you film them, or did someone else?
I was going to say to that point, I always wanted them to be documented, but it was other people that were the filmmakers that shot it, people that had access to cameras and stuff like that.
And sorry, but being in LA, I mean, wasn't that part of the accessibility to such things, because people have just like the cable access there being just a little more pro than other cities, just the industry, or
I mean, in theory, yeah, but it felt like it was a giant divide between the people that were the industry back then and the people that were the underground. And you know, there was very few people, like maybe Penelope Spheris with the decline of Western civilization kind of managed to cross the two or whatever. But we kids didn't really know how to get cameras and stuff. So when somebody had one, like this guy, Gary Walco, that filmed all the stuff out there in the desert for that show.
Which looks great. I mean, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary. It looks great. I mean, I don't know.
No,
It comes with the
he's
camera.
a legit filmmaker, but you know, he came to me and said like, hey, can we have some spots on your bus? And so I was like, okay, but you know, like we have to share the footage. Anyway, long story, but it took me a long time to assemble all the different
For sure.
material and photography and things like that in order to make it into a film. So yeah.
Which, by the way, we think it's very seamless, and it is definitely a great document of that trajectory of outsider art and music, outsider filmmaking, and then outside of everything out in the desert. You did a good job with that.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
Really, really good. And also, then there was the third and last one. Was it only 3 that you did in the desert?
3 desert shows and one
on the boat,
on a whale watch boat. Yeah.
So you actually captured Sonic Youth in their peak in that desert show. We really did. And also I love the Red Cross story. I mean, Red Cross, you know, there's a rumor that I think one of the McDonald's Lunchables started that I tried to chicken hawk them once. I'm like, hey, if I would have tried, I would have succeeded. Come back around now, motherfucker. Anyway, tell her I love the Red Cross story, because they're supposed to be on were they supposed to be on the same bill with Sonic Youth?
Yeah.
And
So the idea was that, you know, Sonic Youth, they were out in LA, and I guess it was around the time that Death Valley 69 came out as a 7-inch, right?
I guess.
With you, yeah. Well, you're on there somewhere.
I am.
So we were talking about what could we do? Let's do a desert show. We went up to Spawn Ranch with Kim and Thurston, and like just kind of like, you know, had a day trip of checking that out. And so I knew that they would be back at Christmas time because Kim's
Gotta see mommy. Gotta see mommy.
Kim's parents were still alive here in LA, and so that seemed like, okay, at least that part's covered, you know, so we could have Sonic Youth there. And then we started talking about, well, who else should be on the bill? And they were just huge Red Cross fans. I was way into Red Cross at that time, going to see them a lot. And so that seemed like a good combination, even though their music was pretty different, but their sensibilities somehow kind of
right. Well, they're big. If they had a hit, Linda Blair was their hit song. It was fantastic.
Yeah. To me, that's the ultimate distillation of Red Cross.
And glam loving boys outside of everything. So anyway, they're flying down from a show in San Francisco, and some gal is picking them up at the airport.
Right. I'll just throw in. So also there was the Meat Puppets who had played on the boat with the Minutemen. So now this was a chance to have them out in the desert. And then a guy named Perry Farrell had a band called Psycom, who was my roommate at the time. And so he's like, yeah, let us open, you know.
Which became Jane's Addiction, yeah.
Right. And so, but with Red Cross, like they you know, were basically optimistically thinking they could do a gig in San Francisco, fly to Burbank, drive out to the desert, and everything would be fine. And what ended up happening was, I guess somebody had been lined up to give them a ride, which is kind of the way things worked back then. A lot of it was very informal, but she shows up at the Burbank airport and she has this car with these big Anarchy A's, you know,
painted all over
it. They jump in the car, and then I guess no one really had given her
the map
directions. Yeah,
because it didn't this event have a very rough map of how to find it? Very rough.
Yeah. Right, but certainly the idea was that the bands would know how to get there, and you know, so you know, beyond that, I don't really know, because I was out in the desert. This was pre-cell phones. All I know is that there's no Red Cross,
Well, I know because it's in the film and I loved it. They ran out of gas, but they see two other cars are kind of driving, looking for the road they can't find. Run out of gas with gal number one, hop into car number 2 and 3 without their stage clothes, which was to them a disaster, but make it in time to get on stage and then wail about as they would.
Yeah. So ever since then, there was this controversy as to whether they were just trying to be rock stars and headline and they were hiding out in the desert or and then when I finally got the real story, especially from Robert Hecker, who tells it really well, I was just like, oh, of course, because they were like teenagers, like it was all just kind of,
well, they made it they made it and they're in the doc, which is good news to anybody who's freaking interested. So that when did you decide that, okay, the concerts are fine, but look, it does take a lot of preparation, thought. It's not a very money-making thing. It's a great event. It's historical. But when did you decide, all right, I'm going to go into another possible financial hole in the ground called publishing?
So true. Well, basically, it was again like me and some close friends, one of them, Mariska, who is in the film and was part of the Desolation Center shows, decided that we needed to have like a store in LA that would be completely inspired by the research, especially those lists of books and films and stuff at the end of each interview in
right.
the
research publication.
But it was also like a little bit of Loom Panics, which was kind of extreme libertarian, like how to make bomb books and things like that. So it was just extreme freedom of speech and the press. And it was going to be a store originally, a video store and a bookstore. And then once again, it was kind of like, well, we don't really have the money to get all the books that we need for the store. Maybe we should make a little mail order catalog, because this is, again, pre-internet, pre-Amazon, all that. And it was really hard to find this stuff. And so we put a lot of time into sourcing all these books, and then we decided, well, let's make it kind of like a cool Dada collage book catalog instead, more in the spirit of a zine than a regular book catalog. So that was the Amok Fifth Dispatch, and then that eventually we got enough books to be able to open a store, and so that was always that was like this 3-part thing. Let's have a mail order catalog, let's have a bookstore, and then let's start publishing books. So then we started doing the book publishing as part of that, and the store ended up there for 10 years. I mean, in 2 different locations in LA.
Then again, dealing with pretty extreme subject matter, and again, I mean, as we're all extremists, it's something, it burns in you. You got to fricking do it. You're not thinking about, the cost or the recompensation at the end of it. You just know you got to do it.
Well, in more ways than one. Did you have to deal with harassment, obscenity law issues? Did you have to deal with, just really a decade before that, you had the Hamlings in San Diego who were being harassed because they're releasing Henry Miller and certain pornography and all this stuff. So did you have to do that if you're basically selling books that tell you how to make explosives?
Right. I mean, at the time, we really didn't have a lot of police or FBI or whatever crackdown. In fact, sometimes there would be like cops showing up at our store. I remember one time there's like 2 LAPD officers. We're like, oh shit, here we go, and then they were like, well, we're the occult crime investigation division of the LAPD.
Oh my God.
And we need some background information.
Nice.
Well, it's funny because if you watch crappy shows from LA, like Chips and stuff, they always have themes like punk rocks or satanic cults taking over.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm going to kind of connect these threads between the kind of child groupie glam scene in LA of the early 70s to maybe even what you're doing as literature that could actually be potentially dangerous, even though I totally for the rights for that to be sold. Why were punk rockers playing concerts harassed so much?
Yeah.
No, that's a very valid question. Yeah, they really should have been. Yeah, when you mentioned, what did you say about like underage disco? I mean, there's a certain there was definitely that.
The glam scene
they
from
weren't,
70s.
they weren't shaking down Rodney's disco. They weren't shaking
exactly
that down.
Right. Yeah.
Well, maybe they were getting laid. Maybe there was.
Well, I just think that the let's see, why are they trying to shut down punk rock? I think Don Bowles said it the best in the film, is that they really thought this was the second coming of the Black Panthers. They really were concerned that these suburban white kids,
skinny kids like Don Bowles at 19.
Yeah. Punk Panthers. It's the uprising of the Punk Panthers.
But think about it, like
well, it's because
anarchy,
freedom
like
of thought,
that scared the shit out of them.
Freedom of thought, people doing what they want to do and
Right.
doing it independently and not being part of the system. This is terrifaction for fucking authoritarianism.
Well, yeah, and of course it's always
and Daryl Gates
tyranny and it's so what gives the police chief the right to be judge, jury, executioner? Constitutionally, that's incorrect.
Especially
right?
when there's so much gang activity. I mean, punks, you could consider them a gang, but I mean, the only violence they ever did was usually to themselves, knocking themselves out, pogoing.
Right.
Occasional stabbing or.
I mean, I think it was just the idea that people were going to start thinking for themselves scared the shit out of them, but as far as I don't think they were as concerned about people reading books, because that kind of was like under the radar for cops.
Well, since they never read a book, why would they be scared of them?
Well,
right.
But going back to certain obscenity laws from the early 70s and some of the challenges that pornographers had to take on with the Supreme Court, and I don't know all the books that you were selling. It's just interesting that somehow teenagers hanging out at a rock concert is more threatening than some books that are actually, well, books can let the imagination do all types of exciting and dangerous
trust
things.
me, where would we be without them?
Exactly.
Hello.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there is this idea that if you have a Marquis de Sade book on your bookshelf, that you're therefore on the road to being a serial killer or something like that. And there's
could have happened.
But in general, I do think that the books are almost so subversive that they didn't really get the danger of it. You know what I mean?
And already
Right.
the danger was
Others are illiterate and dumb.
yeah, but also look, thank you, Barney Ross at 60 Obscenity Trials, to have the Marquis de Sade and Henry Miller and Hubert Selby and William Burroughs published. So he had already fought that battle.
Right.
So, and obscenity laws had changed, but even from censorship with the rulings of the obscenity laws in the late 60s, early 70s, there were still battles with
there's still battles.
Al Goldstein and then like Larry Flint. It just kept on going.
Well, and now banning how many books and how many fucking banning the truth. Now the truth period is being banned and replaced with chronic fucking pathological liars.
I want to ask you, I'm kind of jumping ahead quite a bit because we're going to continue with chronologically. What do you think of what I call the neo-Puritanism from the left as a leftist that you're seeing going on right now? How does that make you feel? Because one thing that stood out in your documentary,
alienated.
Well, exactly. One thing that stood out in the documentary, I forgot who said it, said it was a very diverse scene with the concerts. Fat, skinny, male, woman, gay, straight, you name it. But it was all about the art and the music. Now it seems like it's not all about the art and music. It is about these identities before you can even start the art and the music, at least what I'm seeing. So what do you think about that shift?
Yeah, well, I do want to credit Chandelier for that, who unfortunately died before the film came out, because, he was really such a good contributor in terms of just being, eloquent about so many different things and describing seeing Sonic Youth in the desert on LSD and all these other things that Shandy did. But anyway, that was really important to me as far as people understanding the LA scene. Partly is that there were so many, different groups and Latinos like Alice Bag and stuff like that right from the beginning that we would go see, and it wasn't the typical sort of conception of what a punk scene is. But also in terms of today's world, I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot. And I was just talking to Jack Sargent, who you've had on your show, about this whole topic of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and when did it become sort of weaponized by, the Donald Trumps and Elon Musks and all that of the world as well. So I do think that we have to come back to some idea of freedom being part of the left.
Right now it's a battle for freedom of frickin' existence.
Yeah.
Well,
everything else is below that. It's like with the amount of murders, the amount of schoolyard shootings, the amount of incarceration, the amount of homelessness, the amount of hunger. Right now, everybody should come collectively together as a battle for freedom to fucking exist to begin with.
My theory on this is it's still this post Ronald Reagan thing, which is basically hyper deregulation and basically, chaos in terms of money. Hyper deregulation basically allows for basically commodified diversity. It's all for-profit diversity, as opposed to the diversity is just happening organically, and let's gather around actually the information, as opposed to we will commodify and deregulate and basically everything, and then we're gonna have an Oprah Winfrey, for instance.
Well, and right now,
for-profit diversity and all that stuff.
But right now, while we see the expansion of different people of claiming, 40 different kinds of gender, don't wanting to be categorized by your actual physical sex, we see at that time that opening up and everything else closing down. Because is that the new punk rock? Is like the expansion of don't call me man, female, he, they, she, whatever. Is that like now we have that on one side, and then we have the new Puritanism on the other side. We have Cardi B over here, and we have people wanting to ban books in schools. I mean, this is what's so astonishing right now, is how far we have gone backwards.
But I would add that the more time you spend on identity, the less time you spend on class consciousness and people actually talking about economics and getting fucked by whoever it is, whatever, look at the new prime minister in England is, an Asian, and that's great. But at the same time, like, he's also like one of the richest people in the world, and their whole country is turning into like a tax haven for the rich,
that's a great point, because as the class divide gets so insanely insane and perverse, in a weird way, the rest of the world, except for 200 guys, are more unified, and yet the conversations that how divided we are, but in many ways we're more unified because we're all losing. If you're making $150,000, $200,000 a year, you have more in common with a homeless person than you do with a billionaire.
The politician, exactly.
Not to mention like the idea of the oligarch. It's like, well, shit, we have them too. They just don't call them that.
Well, what's interesting to me is how many under financially secure people are voting for these pathological billionaires, as if there's anything in common, not realizing that the very same people that are voting for these ass clowns are the people they are not paying when they hire them to do something. So they have turned that they have somehow really perverted and turned a class of people that should be actually revolting against these billionaires into fucking voting for them. This country's gone whack.
Well, it's the reason why people buy lottery tickets.
Well, we were talking about that the other day. How perverted is this? That suddenly one person in Gallery is one of the richest persons on the planet because they bought a fucking ticket.
Well, I mean, if you reduce it numerically, I mean, there's only, like you said, 200 really fucking rich people, and the rest of us trying to pay the rent. So, Stuart, you have worked with, documented, published some of our dear friends, and you just. Yeah, you missived me the other day that you were meeting with my favorite poet and writer, John Tottenham. You published his hate poems, and you're discussing a follow-up.
Yeah. So, I mean, for those that aren't familiar, I'm going to give him a plug. He really is pretty much the only poet that I can read or stand. But he's a really, he's also in the film Desolation Center. Yeah, I love working with John. He's actually, for all of his sort of
Twitcheries.
Persona. Jesus, the Twitcheries. Yeah. Occasionally he'll just launch into those, but yeah.
He's been on the podcast, and we go way back. I'll tell you that some other time. But he's my favorite performer as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So and there is video online on the Amok YouTube channel if people want to see him doing readings, because I'm with you. He is like one of the great comic sort of performers of our time, and so don't necessarily think poetry, but But anyway, yeah, no, I mean, the honesty of what he does and the way he does it so concisely about, pretty much the despair of life and romance and everything and creativity and everything else.
His great disappointment, which is the fact that he's still alive. So I mean, this is what failed visionary, as he calls himself.
Right.
We love John Tottenham. We wanted to have him on the show again, but he's like, well, no, I have to do it in person, because when we first started the podcast, we were able to actually be with people and then COVID. And also, look, we can't be in the same room with everybody every time we want to talk to them. So he's like, oh, I have to do it in person.
Well, we have now decided to do another book of his poetry, and
the
world, we're going to try and get it all,
the world waits.
Try to not be completely, self-defeating in our promotion. so maybe we'll actually have him do your show when the book is coming out.
Oh, joy to
great idea.
World.
And when's it coming out?
Yeah,
he's got to write it.
Be determined. No, he just has to. He says he's got the poems. I want to see like the file that actually has them in it, because sometimes I've, like with John Gilmore, who's someone that I published about 5 of his books, he would say it was done, but now I actually want to see the book before.
What books of John Gilmore did you publish?
So the most well-known is probably Severed, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder,
which is fantastic.
Yeah. And there's also a great book of his called Laid Bare, which is his memoirs of we subtitled, I forget the whole subtitle, but Wrecked Lives and the Hollywood Death Trip. Yeah. And so he had some amazing experiences, sort of slogging through, trying to, be a movie star or a writer or all these other things. And in the process, had these certain obsessions like the Black Dahlia, which led to this amazing book.
Well, set yourself up for heartbreak. Actor, writer.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And he grew up here, he grew up in Silver Lake, went to Hollywood High School, with people like Carol Burnett and, Sally Struthers and, and ended up to be, in New York with James Dean, and had a little fling with James Dean, apparently. Anyway, but the guy was completely an unknown, basically, although he hung out with all these people like Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson. And
well, that's why somebody's got to tell the story, and that's his story, and that's why you publish it.
Yeah. And it's sort of like a Hollywood Babylon, but first person, because he was actually there in all these scenarios.
And then the Jack Sargent book. I mean, we love Jack Sargent too. I mean, a real just pimp of underground films nonstop. What was the title of his book?
It's called Flesh and Excess. And it's really Jack's more, like, he did the Death Tripping book, and that was about the no wave cinema,
cinema of transgression,
the things that follow cinema of transgression, right? But this is more like a updated overview of all, another, let's say 20 years of underground film and underground video, and just the most kind of like debased stuff all the way through sort of, highbrow ish. But always transgressive in some way or other.
Exactly. Jack Sargent wrote one of the best things about me ever, which was an overview of one of my installations. And this is where I think he tagged, and I've used ever since, the trauma zone concept. That's what my visual and installation art was, based in trauma zone, which was he just nailed it. He's a great writer. He's a great writer, a great friend as well.
And he was a big inspiration in terms of me doing Desolation Center, because we were already friends and we'd known each other from the, alternative book publishing. We would see each other at like the book convention in Chicago and hang out with all these Peter Sotos and people like that. And
wait, hold on. Peter Sotos. When he first got busted for pornography, and the FBI closed in on him, I think I was the only one brave enough to write a defense that literature should not be an indictment against the possibility of actual crimes committed. And
wasn't it
that didn't help him.
Was that a photograph of a collection of like a naked boy from like 1912 or something like that?
Hang on. It was a Xerox copy of his prattling, twatting on and on. But it was, I have to say, it was one of the most exciting things I'd ever read. But the horror that came down upon Peter Sodus, again, was just unheralded. And I mean, of course, my little piddly article did nothing to scream for his cause, but I just thought I'd get that in.
Stuart, why do you think some people who are outlaws and actually are threatening to society are given a pass and some aren't?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, I think, is the nature of society is that, there's always going to be this like desire for the bad boy or whatever that is marketable. And then there's the ones that are just, not going to make money for people. And those are the ones that I think will more likely become the object lesson of, oh, this person is thinking bad thoughts. Let's, put them in prison.
Well, let's talk about Ron Athey, who we mentioned before, a good friend of ours. I mean, one of the 4 people who the NEA came down on for their incendiary art, Karen Finley, I think it was Ron Athey. I don't remember who the other 2 were. But I mean, Ron at that point doing an exhibition, which has always been based on, the horror of religion and his own persecution under the insanity of women in his family. His performance caused the NEA to just complain about and shut down art grants. But somehow Ron managed to, I guess just by being stubborn and relentless, overcome that to the point where he's teaching at major universities and having incredible shows and putting out books and still goes on. And thank you very much. I mean, there's no telling why somebody is picked on. It could be just one asshole complaints. I've never been censored. They're not coming after me.
In Russia, In Russia,
no, I've not been censored. They wanted to incarcerate bookstores for carrying my book, but I still was able to get a visa to go there after that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's money, but also, for instance, with Ron Athey, you have Jesse Helms. So there's political positioning too, that you can scapegoat someone to make a statement.
I always thought if they came after me, they'd have to listen to everything I ever fucking said and knew I was right. So they're not going to do it.
So Stuart, going back to the money thing, and it's also connected with your concerts. I'm sorry, my brain right now. The Minutemen bass player, the famous guy, Mike Watt. So when Mike Watt in your film at one point says, "Well, here we were going to the desert, and we were realizing, as opposed to theorizing, we were actually turning this into reality." And so now, as people are just living in the desert, and as every space that you're exploiting that was maybe empty before is kind of being hogged up, even in the fucking desert. Is there physical room in the physics where people can express this, or are we full digital, you think, at this point? Like, is there any room for such things like what you did?
Such a good statement, Tim, because right before you came on, we were talking about the fact that the desert is being overrun now. So very good question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer to that is partly that I really need to do another desert show to find out. And even though I wouldn't do it the same as what we did in the past, I think I'm starting to get a line on a way to do this, and it won't be, huge, but it would be, something maybe on the same scale of what we've done. But yes, I think it's possible. I do think it's also true, like if you drive from LA out to Joshua Tree now, it's one big sprawl, and and in some ways Joshua Tree feels, I don't know, a bit
overrun.
Like a suburb of Silver Lake or something. I mean, just the gentrification of this desert community it is kind of weird. And
I know you still got vets blowing off rifles in the middle of the night. You got meth labs all over the fucking place. You got coyotes, but still, I hear what you're saying.
Well, John Waters was saying, the rebellion of youth now. It's the first in his life where it wasn't conspicuous. So hippies and punks were very conspicuous in their fashion and their presentation. And now it's a normcore kid coming from his bedroom for ice cream, and he just shut down a bank on his computer. And so Yeah,
I trust John Waters on these things.
Better than shooting up the fucking schoolyard because you haven't gotten laid.
That's a whole other subject. Revenge of the Nerds. Revenge of the Nerds. We never thought Revenge of the Nerds would have been this violent. But
Sincel, not incel. Sincel, not incel. The more they kill, the more we fuck. I'm just saying, ladies.
Fair enough. I think I'm just curious. When I asked you that earlier, I'm just curious myself. Is there a spot to realize, say, underground collective culture in the physics anymore? And I guess you said you'll have to.
When you say in the physics, do you mean just
analog out human
I don't
to human
see
interaction?
Why not?
There's so much open space. No, there is so much fucking open space in this country, in every country. We just don't utilize
and even like being on this boat in the harbor, which was because I did 2 desert shows, and then in my brain I decided, well, doing a third one at that point in time would be repetitive, so let's do something else. So I ended up kind of paying homage to the Minutemen by going to their hometown, which is part of LA technically, but it's the harbor, and it's a very different atmosphere. And we got people on a boat and went around the harbor, and it was actually an amazing show for the Meat Puppets. And so I feel like it's like that's something, of course,
space.
People are like, didn't
frontier.
you know about the Sex Pistols did a show on a boat? It's like, yeah, I knew that.
Who cares?
But this was something completely different for us,
Stuart, I'm just saying, space, the final frontier.
Well, that does lead me into, but I this is something still in the early phases, but there's some people that were part of our kind of industrial noise punk scene that now have a rocketry company. They're called Interorbital Systems, and Mariska and I just went out and visited them.
Wait! Say that again. What is it called?
So I'm going to give them a plug because this is not going to tell you where the show is going to be. But
I love
they actually have been in the Mojave Spaceport, which is about 2 hours from LA, which is where Richard Branson launches his stuff, and Elon, I believe, as well. But they were there first. And they, one of them is it's basically a couple, and they have a company called Interorbital Systems, and so I think that they are going to be sort of my way into doing something that'll have some of the elements that the second show did, with explosives and fire and things that you can't just do anywhere, but also some noise, and so that's going to be in the future.
And you're not going to be sending people up in hot air balloons or blimps to do this, but we'll find a way.
No. But it does have to do with the idea of a launch pad.
Yeah, and it's not going to be fraudulent like Elon Musk launching that car into outer space and playing Rocket Man. I thought there was no sound in space. Like it just doesn't. It was ridiculous to begin with. He has like a stereo cranking in space. Come on. All right.
I mean, if you had so many voices in your head, as he must, you might as well just imagine that there is sound in space because it's coming from inside his own head.
There is a sound in space. I take that back. There's like a drone.
Oh, there's a horrifying sound.
No, but there's like this one pitch drone that's like between B and B flat or something like that.
Right? Doesn't NASA have things that are like
the sound recorded of a black hole?
But maybe you have to pull it into a whole different frequency.
Yeah, I don't know if those are sound waves. I think.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think those are sound waves. There are other waves, but they're not sound waves, as far as I know. I mean, molecule. Yeah, whatever. Not enough molecules to push sound out.
I was just gonna say that my next concert is on a molecular level.
Really?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, are you
always?
Are you just hypothetically thinking of like, hey, what's the next show? Or are you just is it in the works?
Well, it's sort of in the early days. So I mean, I think it's now possible. And so when I was working on the film, I really didn't have time to seriously think about what would the next show be. But now that I've kind of
and that must have taken a really long time to put that together, to get all the film elements from all the different people that filmed it. And I want to go back to the point that I said earlier, that with you starting that in the desert, it was Perry Farrell, eventually Jane's Addiction, who eventually from that and was inspired to do Lollapalooza. From Lollapalooza, Burning Man, Coachella, all of these things. And now we're not saying you're like John Phillips, who took over the Monterey Pop Festival, but in a sense, you kind of fucking were.
Well, as what I say, I think the sequence was maybe Burning Man was before the first Lollapalooza, like the earliest ones, but But I will
still.
say this much. In making the film, I learned about these sort of ripple effects more than I knew, even just because I hadn't really looked into it. But in the case of Perry, I mean, literally, he was one of the people that was taking tickets on the school buses when we went out, to the desert. And he would be the first to admit it was a very heavy influence.
And
on
look,
him.
I mean, unbelievable that he was able to actually take an idea that he was inspired by, being a small part of, but still an integral part, taking tickets, his first band opening, and then however he managed, and we didn't, for whatever the good or the bad, to do fucking Lollapalooza.
Yeah.
Well, Lydia wanted to bring it back to the bus. So these bus drivers were, for hire. They're dropping off people at churches before, and is that what I heard in the documentary?
Yeah, I mean, basically, they were Black people that their job was driving school buses, and and then there was a place in South Central where we got the buses from, and in retrospect, I don't know why they went along with everything. It was just a different time. I think people weren't as conscious of liability and things like that. So
they needed the gig.
They needed the gig, and it was like, yeah, we could drive these buses out on this dry lake bed. I mean, I'm really grateful to them that they were willing to just go with our insanity, because without that we would have just been stuck. So.
And it seemed like people were fairly well behaved on the way out to the desert, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, honestly, people were drinking and tripping and whatever, but I think it was actually a collective experience where people actually kind of got to hang out in a way that you don't at a club, because it's like you're on a school bus. It's like a completely different vibe. And so people actually kind of got to know each other and talk about, music and whatever. So by the time they got there, they were sort of an actual group of people, as opposed to just random people showing up somewhere.
This is not, there's a guy I befriended in Poland who ended up doing sound for these satanic death metal bands in Poland, like Vader and stuff like that. And he basically said when the Iron Curtain went down, Russia and Ukraine really wanted all these Florida death metal and Scandinavian black metal bands there. And they basically all met in Warsaw or something. And all these down to their waist satanic metalheads were all crammed on this fucking bus, kind of similar to this. But they're all piled in there. But their experience was a little different, because once they got into Ukraine, every hour and a half, they're pulled over and they had to pay off a cop. It was just basically all this, bribery and all this stuff going down. But what I'm getting at is, when people talk about that for that kind of death metal and stuff like that, that was a formative experience. In other words, I'm getting at this kind of early bus experience where everyone who are just outsiders coming together with a similar cause, crammed in this very uncomfortable and bizarre box.
Yeah.
Formative experiences. So yeah, the bus. I think it's something that
No, I have to keep the bus. I mean, if we do a future desert show, I think that element has to be part of it. Because the last one we did, with Sonic Youth and Red Cross and all that, Meat Puppets and Perry, we kind of gave people the choice. You could do the bus thing, or you could drive yourself out there, and it already added an element of just sort of
chaos,
people parking everywhere, and where are they going to get home and all this stuff. I mean, not that I'm against chaos, but it kind of, I think it made it less focused in a certain way.
I think the bus is a good idea. Just saying.
Yeah.
I mean, look, when we go on tour, we're often in not a bus, we're in a van. That'll either bring you together or pull you apart. It always brings us together until there's too much talk about rock trivia. Then I shut down. Then I just they start talking filthy and they shut up.
Nice.
So what's
what's next?
What's next? What's right in front of you?
Well, so I've been working on a project that's sort of bringing together the filmmaking and TV production stuff that I've done with the book publishing, and it's actually what I'm working on is a streaming true crime Black Dahlia show, 3-parter or something like that, based on Severed. And so I'm hoping that, I'm working with a production company on that. And, I think that that's a story that really needs to be told. And we've got there's a lot of like Black Dahlia kind of
fanatics,
rando misinformation out there.
And fanatics.
So I'm hoping to be doing that, next year, getting that in production.
Can we just mention for 1 minute, because sometimes I need a little light relief, and I have to say I was shocked to find ice truckers on your resume, because Deadliest Catch, ice truckers. Sometimes I turn to these kind of reality shows. What did you have to do with ice truckers?
Okay, first of all, I want to say that I'm impressed by you doing your homework, Lydia. And every time I listen to one of these interviews, you dig deep. And we haven't really talked about Tyler much, but I thought you did a wonderful job with his interview.
Thank you, Tyler hubby.
So at some point in my life, I decided that, I was recruited into the TV business by the Syfy Channel. And then at a certain point, I ended up working on the Chris Angel Mind Freak show. And then I found myself I'm freelance, but I don't have any work. And then, so I started meeting with different people. And Tom Beers is the guy who started Original Productions, is really the guy who created the whole Deadliest Catch franchise.
I loved it.
And
never have I seen more men die in one show.
Tom's like, yeah, I don't need any producers. I got producers, but I need a development guy. And so I turned him down. I didn't want to do development, but then anyway, long story short, I became a VP of development at that production company. And I'm a big history buff. And so I thought, let's do stuff for the History Channel. But at that point in time, all anybody wanted was, where's our Deadliest Catch,
Right. And the History Channel, like MTV, it's not consistent with the title of the network. It's just whatever's popular.
Right. No, it went from being the Hitler Channel to being basically, like every other channel. But it had to be manly, and it had to, because that was the thing, is there was this whole dangerous job sort of thing. So anyway, they did bring to me a show. They had a series of single-hour things called suicide missions, and most of them were people going into Afghanistan or whatever. But this one was these guys driving over a frozen lake in Canada, and they're like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Well, let us do this show. We would be the best people to do this."
And I thank you for it, because occasionally I am there with the ice truckers.
So the big mistake was that I referenced Wages of Fear in my pitch to Tom Beers, which was a French film about these guys driving trucks with dynamite,
dynamite,
which is very existential, but it's in French. And so anyway, he goes, "I don't know what the fuck you're talking about," but anyway, so I kept working on this ice road truckers thing, and we actually sent people that Scott B was up there, was part of our team, and Roger Trilling was the casting guy. Anyway, it was a crazy situation, but we found enough ice road truckers with big personalities and put this reel together, and then it became the show that gosh, it must be one of the biggest reality shows.
So
which is so weird, because look, all you're doing is you're seeing people, a couple of weirdos, driving trucks over ice that may crack, melt, or they may crash, trying to get the shit to go to a place that nobody else has the balls to take it to. I don't know why it's so involving.
The suspense, and I've never seen a full episode, but I know what it is, and nothing against the show, but both of you could inform me. Has anyone just cracked through the ice completely or died on the show?
You know what? Not on the show, but actually the company that did this first one, the 1 hour that they gave me, one of the family members died in a ice road crash. But so I call them up and we're like, well, could we do a show with, a series with you guys now? And they're like, I can't believe you're calling us. You know that our nephew died. And I was just like, oh shit. But anyway, so we had to find a different ice road.
They always
line
make
that-
it, but so there is a kind of Gilligan's Island side that they always come out ahead. They just like Gilligan's Island, they always end up back of the island. Everyone knows where it's going to kind of go, but somehow
that's kind of true. It's kind of true, but I mean, there are trucks do crash, they do break down,
Okay.
but I don't really understand why it's so engaging. But because usually I'm just
it's done well, clearly.
I'm
Well,
on
part of it-
forensics. I'm on forensics mostly.
Yeah, part of the magic of it is I think that they figured out how to tell you what almost happened and what they just missed and what happened at this point before and another time. And and then there is it is pretty insane if you think about there's whiteouts where they can't see.
It's
and they're
an
driving over
amazing
supposedly
landscape. And look, I like any shows that show specifically, and most usually, although there's more women in them now, acts that men will do that are so ridiculous that I would never myself do, like drive on an ice road with a huge truck. I would never be fishing for king crabs in the Bering Strait. I also love the show Alone. I am not going to go into the woods with nothing but 10 implements for 75 days for any amount of money. I love shows that they just represent things that I think are so outlandish. I'm not going to do that shit.
Stuart, would you consider a spinoff called Ice Smoking Truckers, which are like amphetamines? They call it the California turnaround, coast to coast to coast, just amphetamine fueled truckers.
That's a reality show that's really happening. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that could be pretty entertaining in terms of the dialogue. But I think there's something about the fact everybody thinks, well, I don't know, maybe it is like a male female split, but everybody thinks that they can drive. Like I could maybe do that. You know what I mean?
There's a cool gal on Ice Truckers, and she's pretty hardcore. But I mean, Alone has more women. Whatever. I don't think The Deadliest Catch. I never saw a gal there, but I did see a lot of men go overboard. I did like that show.
So yeah,
evil chuckle. I'm sorry about that.
Who knew that Lydia Lunch was our target audience?
I admit,
eclectic tastes.
Well, it just goes only between hardcore true crime or forensics into the occasional light relief of the possibility of a man going overboard while trying to catch a fucking crab. I gotta say it. All right. That's all I know.
Well, Lydia likes men on the verge of disaster.
That's true. I mean, can I say? And with that on the table, I mean, I think we'll just wrap up this edition of the Lydian Spin. And gotta go cause a little disaster myself.
Oh boy.
Stuart Swezey, Amok Books, Desolation Center. The documentary is out now. Not Stopping Ice Road Truckers, for those of you not in the know, and various other things, and dealing with personalities that are close to our very heart and ideas and concepts as an individualist. And thank you very much, Stuart.
Thanks.
Pleasure, Stuart.
See you soon.